Charlotte County 911, what is your emergency?
Oh my God! It's my neighbor! He went for a swim! I heard a scream! And then the water just exploded!
Sir, please slow down. What is happening?
Oh, jeez, his arm. I think there's blood everywhere. I can't see him.
We all crave moments of peace, don't we? Those precious slivers of time where the world slows down, where the daily grind fades, and we can simply be. Maybe it's a quiet cup of coffee on the porch, a walk in the park, or, for many, the simple, soul-cleansing act of slipping into cool water on a warm evening. We build our lives around these rituals, these anchors of normalcy that make us feel safe, grounded, even, dare I say, invincible. We tell ourselves that danger is always out there, in the chaotic world beyond our quiet havens. But what if that feeling of absolute security is nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion? What if the very sanctuary you turn to for solace, the familiar waters that have cradled you countless times, conceal a primordial horror? A silent, ancient shadow lurking just beneath the surface, waiting for the precise moment to shatter your peace, to rip away everything you hold dear in a single, brutal, unthinkable instant. This isn't just a grim tale of an animal attack. No, this is a chilling testament to the terrifying fragility of life, to how quickly a cherished routine can transform into an unspeakable nightmare. It's about the crushing, gut-wrenching weight of loss, the sickening realization that the wild, untamed world, often just a stone's throw from our manicured lawns, can reach out and snatch you into its terrifying depths. And for one man, on a seemingly ordinary Florida evening in 1977, that nightmare became a horrifying, inescapable reality, pulling him into a darkness from which he would never return. George Leonard. The name echoes with a certain unassuming strength, much like the man himself. At 52 years old, George wasn't just another face in Charlotte County, Florida. He was a vital thread woven into the very fabric of its community. He had witnessed the county's transformation firsthand, the slow, steady hum of development replacing the languid pace of yesteryear, the quiet groves giving way to burgeoning neighborhoods, canals stretching like veins through the landscape. Yet George, with his steady demeanor and easy smile, remained an enduring presence. He was the quintessential neighbor, the kind of man who'd appear at your door with a borrowed wrench or a freshly baked pie without you even having to ask. He was known at the local hardware store not just as a customer, but as a friend, always ready with a cheerful word or a piece of practical advice. His laugh, a deep, resonant sound, was a familiar and comforting presence, often heard drifting from his backyard or echoing faintly from across the canal. It spoke of a life lived with quiet contentment, of simple pleasures cherished. George had made Florida his home many years prior, drawn by the irresistible trifecta of endless sunshine, the promise of good fishing, and the alluringly slower pace of life that still clung to parts of the state. He made his living in construction, a profession that demanded both physical endurance and sharp problem-solving skills. It kept him active, grounded, and provided a steady rhythm to his days. But it was in the evenings, after the relentless Florida sun began its slow descent, after the dust of a long day's work had settled, that George truly came alive. His routine was unwavering, almost sacred. His evening swim in the cool, inviting waters of the Peace River Canal was far more than just a form of exercise. It was a ritual, a profound act of decompression. It was his personal balm, a way to shed the day's stresses, to wash away the heat and the noise, and to reconnect with the serene, almost spiritual beauty of his surroundings. The canal was his sanctuary, his private haven. Here he could float weightless, feeling the cool current embrace him, allowing his mind to drift, to truly find peace. His connection to the water ran deep, almost spiritual. He knew its shifting moods, its hidden currents, the subtle nuances of its depths. He'd often speak with a quiet reverence about the profound sense of tranquility he found there, how the world seemed to slow, if only for those precious, fleeting moments. He had a close-knit circle of friends, a loving family who treasured his unwavering reliability, his dry wit, and his infectious, albeit gentle optimism. They all knew his evening habit. They knew he'd be out there, a dark, solitary silhouette against the fading light, finding his quiet bliss. Not a single soul, not in their wildest imaginings, could have conceived that this innocent pleasure, this cherished, life-affirming routine, would become the very instrument of his tragic, brutal undoing. The thought was simply, chillingly, inconceivable. The architect of this unfolding tragedy was not some mythical beast from an ancient legend. It was a creature as intrinsically woven into the fabric of Florida as the cypress trees in the slow-moving rivers. It was the undisputed apex predator of these waterways, the American alligator. And this particular specimen was no juvenile. It was a formidable male, reported to be a full 7 feet in length. 7 feet. Try to visualize that. A living, breathing, primal engine of muscle, bone, and teeth, capable of exploding from the water with a terrifying, instantaneous burst of speed and power. Alligators are indigenous to the vast network of Florida's waterways. They are a common, albeit often unseen presence in its murky rivers, its expansive lakes, and its countless intricate canals. They are quintessential ambush predators, perfectly honed by millions of years of evolution for stealth, surprise, and overwhelming, brutal force. Their skin, a remarkably tough, leathery armor, offers incredible protection against both environmental hazards and potential prey. Their jaws, capable of exerting a bone-crushing pressure measured in the thousands of pounds per square inch, are specifically designed to grip, to hold, and to tear. And those teeth? Not just one or two, but row upon row of menacing, razor-sharp daggers, perfectly engineered for seizing and ripping flesh. A 7-foot alligator is far past its adolescent stage. It's a mature, established hunter, inherently territorial, possessing immense power, and driven by instinct. While often perceived as sluggish and lethargic when basking on a sunny bank, in their aquatic domain, they are incredibly agile, remarkably silent, and deceptively fast. Their dark olive-drab coloring provides perfect camouflage in the murky, tannin-stained waters, allowing them to vanish from plain sight, only to reappear in a flash when it's tragically too late. What makes them truly dangerous, what taps into our deepest fears, is their cold, instinctual behavior. If they perceive a vulnerable prey item, or if they feel even slightly threatened in their territory, they will strike with a brutal, unthinking efficiency that defies human comprehension. And this particular alligator, this silent, 7-foot phantom, had already made its ominous presence known in the very waters of the Peace River Canal. It was a silent, escalating series of warnings, tragically, devastatingly unheeded. The chilling, almost unbearable truth is that the seeds of this tragedy were sown long before September 28th. The danger wasn't some sudden, unforeseeable event that erupted from nowhere. No, for weeks, perhaps even months leading up to that fateful night, a quiet unease had been slowly, subtly, settling over the residents along the Peace River Canal. There had been sightings, not just fleeting glimpses, but repeated, increasingly bold appearances. A dark, scaly shape, larger than usual, gliding ominously just beneath the shimmering surface. A pair of cold, unblinking eyes breaking the glassy reflection of the water at dusk, staring intently towards the shore. Neighbors, usually quick to dismiss such things as exaggerated fishing tales, had begun to murmur, to exchange worried glances over fences and across driveways. "Did you see that big one by the bend yesterday? Heard he's been lurking near the docks, closer than usual." These weren't isolated incidents. There were unsettling whispers, hushed reports of small pets, usually dogs or cats, disappearing without a trace along the canal banks. Of unexplained, violent splashes in the dead of night, sounds that hinted at something large and powerful striking in the darkness. These were warnings, subtle at first, like faint ripples on the water, then growing more insistent, more ominous, like a building storm. It's highly probable that local wildlife authorities, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, FWC, received reports, or perhaps more commonly, The community simply relied on the deeply ingrained but dangerously flawed assumption that alligators, while ever present, generally kept to themselves, preferring the wilder, less populated areas of the river system. But this particular alligator, this 7-foot phantom, seemed to be growing bolder, its natural fear of humans steadily eroding. It was growing increasingly comfortable in closer, more dangerous proximity to human habitation. It's a pattern observed countless times in wildlife encounters. A predator becoming habituated, losing its innate wariness of humans, or more terrifyingly, beginning to associate human activity with potential food sources. Was someone perhaps unknowingly feeding it scraps, inadvertently conditioning it? Was it simply a particularly aggressive territorial individual, driven by a powerful instinct to defend its perceived hunting grounds? Whatever the underlying reason, the invisible lines of safety, the unspoken boundaries between human and wild, were blurring, dissolving. Each sighting, each ignored warning, each unsettling report chipped away at the perceived invulnerability of the canal, inexorably transforming it from a serene recreational retreat into a potentially deadly hunting ground. And no one, not even George Leonard, with all his familiarity with the water, could have truly grasped just how devastatingly that breakdown of safety would manifest. The stage, unseen by most, was being meticulously set for an unimaginable tragedy, one slow, deliberate, terrifying sighting at a time. The air itself, for those who truly paid attention, seemed to hum with an unspoken tension. September 28, 1977. A Wednesday. The air in Charlotte County still clung to the lingering warmth of Florida's prolonged summer, a heavy, humid blanket that only began to lift as evening approached. The sun, a fiery orb in the western sky, had begun its slow, deliberate descent, painting the clouds in fiery hues of orange and purple. For George Leonard, it had been a day much like countless others. He'd put in a full day's work in construction, the rhythmic clang of hammers, the roar of machinery, the camaraderie of shared effort. Perhaps he'd stopped at the local convenience store for a cold drink, exchanged a few easy words with the cashier, then made his way home as the golden hour light began to spread across the familiar landscape. Around 8:30 p.m., the neighborhood along the Peace River Canal was settling into its quiet evening rhythm. Lights flickered on in homes, casting warm, inviting glows onto lawns. The distant sound of a television, the murmur of conversation from open windows, the faint aroma of dinner. George, adhering to his unwavering custom, prepared for his swim. He might have hummed a tuneless melody to himself, perhaps stretched a few aching muscles, anticipating the cool, soothing embrace of the water. He walked out to the edge of the canal, a place he knew as intimately as the back of his own hand, a place where he felt utterly, completely at ease. The water in the fading light would have appeared utterly still, a dark mirror reflecting the first few stars beginning to prick the darkening sky. He slipped into the water, the familiar initial chill, a welcome shock against his sun-warmed skin. He took a deep breath, the air thick with the scent of damp earth and river water. He began his measured strokes, rhythmically cutting through the almost glassy surface. The sounds of the burgeoning night, the ceaseless chirping of crickets, the deep, throaty croak of bullfrogs from the banks, the rustle of leaves in a barely there breeze formed a soothing, natural chorus. He swam for a few minutes, perhaps 50 yards from the bank, lost in the almost meditative rhythm of his movements, lost in the profound quietude that enveloped him. He might have been replaying conversations from the day, mentally planning tomorrow's tasks, or simply existing in the blissful moment, enjoying the unadulterated act of being free and unburdened in the water he loved. And then, at approximately 8:35 p.m., the world exploded. There was no discernible warning, no ripple breaking the water's perfect stillness, no telltale shadow beneath the surface, no disturbing current. Just an instantaneous, unimaginable, blinding force, a sudden crushing vice, clamping down with terrifying power on his left arm. The water, moments before so peaceful, so inviting, erupted into a violent, churning maelstrom around him. George's breath hitched in his throat, a raw, primal scream tearing from his lungs, a sound cut short almost immediately as he was dragged beneath the surface. He felt searing, excruciating pain, a bone-grinding pressure that transcended anything he had ever known. The alligator had him. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him with a ferocity that matched his attackers. He thrashed violently, desperately, his free arm flailing, kicking with all his might, desperate to break free from the unyielding, vice-like grip. The creature was a relentless primeval force, pulling him deeper, dragging him inexorably into the dark, cold depths. He felt the terrifying sensation of being pulled under, the water closing over his head, cold and dark and suffocating. His lungs burned, screaming for air. He kicked, he punched, he struggled with every fiber of his being, a man fighting for his very existence against an ancient, unthinking, perfectly evolved predator. He thought of his life, his friends, his quiet home, all flashing before his eyes as the struggle became a desperate losing battle. Then came the unimaginable, a sickening, wet tear, a wrenching, tearing sensation that went beyond mere pain, beyond even what his traumatized mind could process. It was a profound, horrifying emptiness where his left arm had been just moments before. The alligator, in its notorious, brutal death roll, had twisted its massive body, twisting and tearing until the limb had been severed completely at the elbow. The water, moments ago a source of comfort and serenity, was now churning with his own blood, warm and metallic, mingling with the cool, murky canal water. George surfaced, gasping, choking on water and air, a guttural cry of pure, unadulterated agony escaping his lips. He was disoriented, shock beginning its insidious creep into his system, but the primal, overwhelming instinct to survive still roared within him. He had to get out. He had to reach the bank, that distant, dark line of safety. With only one arm, bleeding profusely, his body screaming in protest with every movement, he began to paddle, desperately, blindly towards the faint outline of the distant bank. Every stroke was an act of Herculean effort, fueled by raw adrenaline and the desperate will to live. Every ragged breath was a gasp of pain. He heard a neighbor shout, faint at first, then growing louder, more urgent. Hope, a tiny, fragile flicker, ignited within the swirling darkness of his agony. He just needed to hold on, just a few more feet. The pain was blinding, the world narrowing to the desperate, all-consuming need for air, for safety, for an end to this waking nightmare. He mustered every last ounce of his rapidly draining strength, hauling his broken, bleeding body onto the muddy bank, collapsing there, gasping, utterly spent. Blood, dark and viscous, stained the earth beneath him. His nightmare, however, was only just truly beginning. The scream, that single guttural, heart-stopping sound had ripped through the quiet evening, tearing neighbor Jim Henderson from his supper. He'd frozen, fork halfway to his mouth, his ears straining, trying to make sense of the horrifying sound. It had been raw, utterly primal, brimming with terror. Then the frantic, violent splashing, the kind of thrashing that spoke of a desperate struggle. Jim had leaped to his feet, a cold knot of dread tightening in his stomach. He'd rushed to his living room window, peering out into the deepening twilight toward the canal. What he saw next would be seared into his memory forever. The churning, dark water, ominously rippling, and then George, struggling, his body convulsing, a horrifying crimson spreading rapidly in the water around him. Jim didn't hesitate for a second, his own terror momentarily overridden by a frantic need to act. He grabbed the rotary phone from its perch, his hands shaking so violently he almost dropped it. His voice, when he finally got through to the 911 dispatcher, was a ragged, breathless whisper. Then it escalated into a desperate, frantic shout. "My neighbor! He's been attacked! I think it's an alligator! His arm! Oh God, his arm is gone!" His eyes were fixated on George's still form on the bank, barely discernible in the failing light, the dark stain growing beneath him. Within what felt like an eternity, but was likely mere minutes, the mournful wail of sirens began to cut through the once peaceful night. First one, then two, then a cacophony of approaching help, growing louder, more insistent. Charlotte County Sheriff's deputies were the first to arrive, their patrol car lights strobing against the trees, casting surreal, disorienting shadows across the quiet neighborhood. They found George on the muddy bank, barely conscious, his face a ghastly ashen color, his body racked with profound shock and critical blood loss. The sight was horrific, even for seasoned officers accustomed to grim scenes. One deputy, reacting instantly, tore off his belt and began frantically applying a makeshift tourniquet to the stump of George's arm, trying desperately to stem the arterial spray that pulsed rhythmically from the wound. Paramedics arrived mere moments later, their professionalism and grim efficiency a stark contrast to the unfolding chaos. They moved with practiced urgency, their movements swift and precise. Shouts of "trauma kit" and "IV fluids" and "he's going into shock" sliced through the humid night air. They worked quickly, assessing the catastrophic injury, carefully wrapping the severed limb, though by now it was tragically clear that the damage was beyond repair. The arm gone for good. George was fading in and out of consciousness, his words slurred, barely audible whispers of pain and disorientation, a testament to the immense, overwhelming shock his body was enduring. He was carefully, gently, loaded onto a stretcher, then swiftly maneuvered into the back of the waiting ambulance. The vehicle sped away, its siren's mournful, fading cry disappearing into the distance. A sound that would forever be etched in the memory of those who witnessed that terrible night. Meanwhile, other deputies moved to secure the scene. The Peace River Canal, usually a place of quiet recreation, of fishing and gentle boat rides, was now undeniably a grim crime scene. Powerful spotlights were brought in, their beams cutting through the darkness, illuminating the dark, disturbed surface of the water where the attack had occurred. Investigators began to meticulously scour the bank for any clues, any trace of the monstrous predator. Witnesses, drawn by the blinding lights and the persistent wail of sirens, began to gather, their faces etched with a potent mixture of shock, fear, and morbid curiosity. Some immediately recalled the recent, unsettling alligator sightings. "We told them," one elderly woman cried, her voice trembling with a potent blend of sorrow and frustration. "We knew he was there. He was getting too close." The simmering unease, the nagging suspicion of a lurking threat, had now materialized into an undeniable, horrifying reality. The investigation had truly begun, not just into a simple animal attack, but into a primal act of nature that had stolen a man's limb, and possibly, with chilling certainty, his very life. The air was thick with the scent of river water, damp earth, and a lingering metallic tang of blood. The next 3 days were an agonizing, torturous vigil. George Leonard was rushed into immediate emergency surgery, a team of dedicated doctors fighting desperately, valiantly, to save his life. The alligator's bite had been unimaginably powerful, not only severing his arm cleanly at the elbow, but causing immense soft tissue damage, crushing injuries, and catastrophic blood loss. Infection, a constant and deadly threat in any animal attack, particularly from a creature living in stagnant waters, was an immediate and overwhelming concern. Despite the tireless, almost heroic efforts of the medical staff, the transfusions, the antibiotics, the multiple surgeries, George's body, already severely traumatized and weakened, began its inevitable succumbing to the overwhelming injuries. His vital signs flickered, then dimmed. On October 1st, 1977, precisely 3 days after the unspeakable attack, George Leonard quietly passed away from complications directly resulting from the brutal bite. The Peace River Canal, once his cherished sanctuary, the source of his quiet peace, had, in the end, claimed his life. The news ripped through Charlotte County like a wildfire, swift and devastating. Local newspapers, particularly the Charlotte Herald-News, ran banner headlines, stark and unambiguous. "Man dies after alligator attack. Tragedy strikes Peace River. Local man succumbs to gator bite." The story quickly spread beyond the borders of Florida, picked up by national wire services like the Associated Press and United Press International. Suddenly, George Leonard, a private man who simply loved his evening swim, became an unwilling symbol of the raw, unpredictable, and utterly terrifying power of nature. His name was uttered in hushed tones, a cautionary tale. An autopsy, performed with grim precision, meticulously confirmed the cause of death, painting a horrifyingly clear picture of the extent of his injuries. The sheer bite force, the tearing, the profound hemorrhagic shock to his system. Law enforcement, working in close conjunction with Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, FWC officers, immediately launched an intensive hunt for the alligator. The directive was clear: locate and humanely remove the dangerous animal responsible. They were convinced the reported 7-foot alligator, whose presence had been repeatedly documented in the area, was the culprit. Traps were strategically set along the canal banks, patrols intensified, and the community watched. A potent mixture of grief, fear, and a desperate, almost primal need for closure. The FWC faced immense public pressure to act decisively. The public reaction was a complex, potent brew of sorrow, outrage, and deep-seated fear. Many expressed profound sympathy for George and his grieving family, sending cards, flowers, and offering support. Others, however, were quick to demand immediate, stricter measures regarding alligator control, especially in increasingly populated areas adjacent to waterways. There were fierce, often heated debates about human encroachment on traditional wildlife habitats and the inherent undeniable dangers of living in such close proximity to powerful, ancient predators. Some voices argued that George, by choosing to swim at night, had, however unknowingly, put himself at grave risk, ignoring the inherent dangers of Florida's wild environments. Other voices vehemently defended his right to enjoy his own property and the local waterways, arguing that the onus was on the authorities to manage dangerous wildlife. This tragic incident wasn't just a personal catastrophe. It became a flashpoint for long-standing, simmering tensions between Florida's relentless urban development and the preservation of its unique, often dangerous wildlife. Legally, the case was straightforward. It was an animal attack, a tragic accident, not a criminal act. There would be no arrests, no charges. However, the incident spurred a flurry of internal reports and policy reviews within the FWC, undoubtedly leading to reevaluations of their public safety guidelines, their nuisance alligator policies, and possibly even how they communicated known alligator sightings to residents. Media coverage continued for weeks, with reporters interviewing grieving neighbors who spoke of George's kindness, wildlife experts who explained alligator behavior, and local officials who promised action. The story of George Leonard, the man who simply loved his evening swim, became an indelible cautionary tale, a stark, visceral reminder that even in seemingly tranquil, domesticated environments, nature's wild, indifferent heart can beat with devastating, unforgiving force. The Peace River Canal, forever marked by blood and profound tragedy, would never again be seen as merely a peaceful place to swim. It would always carry the heavy shadow of that terrible night, a silent, chilling testament to the overwhelming, untamed power of the wild. The waters of the Peace River Canal continue to flow, as they always have, in an endless, indifferent cycle. The sun still rises, warm and bright, and it still sets, casting long, peaceful shadows across the banks. But for those who lived through that time, for those who heard the choked screams or read the horrifying headlines, for George Leonard's family and friends, those tranquil waters will forever hold a different, darker meaning. They are a profound, chilling mirror, reflecting not just the endless sky above, but also the thin, fragile veil that separates our carefully constructed world from the ancient, untamed wild. And in that reflection, a terrifying, immutable truth endures. Sometimes, the most serene and inviting places harbor the most unimaginable horrors, reminding us with brutal finality that even in our modern, technologically advanced world, we are never truly masters of nature. We are, and always will be, merely temporary, vulnerable guests in its vast, indifferent, and profoundly ancient domain. The alligator, the silent hunter, has always been there, watching from the depths, waiting. And sometimes in the dark and still waters,